Welcome to the Fear and Greed Business Interview. I'm Sean Aylmer. Tomorrow, Australians head to the polls for the first referendum since the vote on the Republic more than 20 years ago. There's a high bar here. In order to change the Constitution to introduce an Indigenous voice to Parliament, there needs to be what they're calling a double majority, a majority of voters nationally and a majority of states all saying yes. Since 1906, there have been 44 referendums, only 8 have passed. I wanted to take a look at the politics of this, what it means for the Albanese Government, what it means for the Dutton opposition, and the long-term political impact of the vote. Charles Croucher is the Chief Political Editor for Nine News. Charles, welcome to Fear and Greed.
Hi, Sean.
I've got to ask you first up, Charles, are you enjoying the job? It's less than 12 months now. You're doing a great job, but big shoes to fill too.
I appreciate it. Yeah, huge. It's a wonderful job. I'm so lucky. I having worked in the office under Laurie Oakes, it's always going to be Laurie's job. But then to have Chris Yeoman there in such pivotal years for our country and for the globe, I've always called Chris one of the great long-term thinkers that Canberra's produced, and he was so good over those 5 years. So, it's a lot to follow those two, but I'm really enjoying it.
Well, you're doing it very well. The yes vote, the no vote tomorrow, the referendum. Is there any way that yes can win?
Look, there is. I mean, all the polling suggests no will win. If I was betting, I would certainly suggest that no will win. There is a hope, and it is a skerrick of hope among those on the yes side, that when people get into the privacy of the ballot box, that the physical act of voting no is too much for them. They want to do what they perceive as being good for Indigenous and First Nations Australians, and therefore they vote yes. That is kind of the glimmer of hope. Now, the odds against that are so monumental, because not just the polling and consistent polling, both published polls and the internal polls, which in many cases are worse than those published polls, but also that double majority you mentioned. And it's just so hard in Australia to change the Constitution because of the majority of states rule, which really means 2 out of 3, effectively, so 4 out of 6. So you need 2/3 of the states to say yes, 4 out of the 6 states. That is in itself is difficult, and given the margins look like they're going to be so big in WA and particularly Queensland, even with the 4 states, the yes side are going to need to run up the score in New South Wales and Victoria, and then try and scrape over the line in South Australia. It's all hard, right? So there's lots against it. Is it possible? Yes. Is it likely? Absolutely not.
Prime Minister Anthony Albanese has put a lot into this from election night on. Will it be damaging for him if it's defeated?
So 2 schools of thought here. I don't like doing the on one hand and on the other, but I'll do it. The first is that, and certainly one being pushed by the coalition, is that this is a rejection of the Prime Minister's vision of the nation. Anthony Albanese has certainly made it very clear this is something he wants. He mentioned it in his speech on election night. The night he was elected, this is one of the first things he mentioned. And if the polls are to be believed and are correct, then the nation will have overwhelmingly rejected that tomorrow. That's an argument that was used against David Cameron in the Brexit election, and he stood down that afternoon. Now, I don't expect Anthony Albanese to do that, but this is damaging for him. The other school of thought is that he has gone to the election saying he would do this. He has now done that. He has kept his word, and he can move on and get back to the biggest issue, which remains far and away cost of living. We always say the main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. Well, the main thing is cost of living. The Prime Minister can then go to the public and say, we did what we said we would do. We will adhere to the will of the people, and that will be the end of this. The only thing with that is that I think that is the more likely scenario, that Anthony Albanese will be able to make that argument. But his brand within the Labor Party is damaged. There are those in Cabinet that fought against this version of the voice, and notable members of Cabinet as well. I think the Prime Minister's grip on Cabinet, grip on the party, this understanding that he knew what was best for the party and where Australia was standing, that will be damaged by this, particularly if the result turns out to be like 60-40, which would be just a disaster for the yes side, or worse, then that's a real rejection of this proposition. So I certainly don't think it's going to be the end of Anthony Albanese by any stretch of the imagination. There's too many other things that are happening right now that can refocus the Prime Minister. But this will take some bark off him publicly, and certainly within that cabinet room and within the Labor Party as well.
What about Peter Dutton, even short-term and long-term for Peter Dutton?
Short term, you like to win. The Liberal Party nationally have been short of victories recently. Even by-elections have been pretty tough slog for them. So if Peter Dutton can guide this to a no vote, he will certainly take some of the credit, and rightfully David Littleproud before him was the first one saying the Nats would say no, and Peter Dutton, who's, again, it's been a pretty rough campaign for everyone, and he certainly has been in the thick of it. Long term, it is interesting to see exactly how this plays out. That idea of negativity surrounds Peter Dutton and has long been associated when you talk to some of the more qualitative polling around him. You know that Labor know it because on just after the election, Tanya Plibersek, be it a slip of the tongue or I think more a calculated risk, called him Lord Voldemort. And there was that idea. She apologised for that, but I think that was planting the seed before the apology came. So whether that hurts him in the long run, the thing that the Liberal Party and the coalition, more the point, because she's a Nat, have gained is Senator Jacinta Price, who has emerged as almost the flag bearer for this one. No one will have their stocks rise higher this referendum than her. She's managed to get herself into cabinet through her hard work on the referendum. That caused Peter Dutton to effectively ignore the coalition agreement because there are now too many Nats in cabinet, or a disproportionate number of Nats in the cabinet, the shadow cabinet. So it will be interesting to see what her trajectory becomes. And that's the one that I think is bubbling away, and I think is the most interesting story that will come out of this. And then it depends when the first Closing the Gap report comes out. And there's nothing to suggest that those results will get any better overnight. And the fact that the no side, if they are successful, were successful, will mean that it'd be easy to blame any of the failures on those that campaigned for no, even though there's no guarantee that that is the way it would have worked out had the voice got through, or if the voice gets through, things will improve. It's a pretty easy line to draw as well. So really, there are long-term implications of this vote, as there are for any referendum. And of course, I guess the biggest thing becomes what happens to Indigenous Australians and the disequalities or the lack of equality that currently exists, particularly in some of those really important measures, life expectancy, finishing education, entrepreneurship, infant mortality. That really has to be the focus for both yes and no campaigners once all the calories that have been spent on this referendum are finished.
Stay with me, Charles. We'll be back in a minute. My guest this morning is Charles Croucher, Chief Political Editor for Nine News. Okay, let's move away from the voice. Cost of living. We will get our focus back on that. It looks like interest rates have peaked or are near peaking. Certainly energy prices, given the Middle East, they're not likely to come down anytime soon. So people are spending more on gas. Insurance premiums are going up. Like, there's plenty in all that. How does that play for the Prime Minister? How does he handle that?
Look, that's still the biggest issue. Every focus group, be it polling done for political parties, polling done for television networks to, peel the covers back a bit or otherwise, will say that cost of living is the biggest issue. And we have gone through the peak of those houses coming off that mortgage cliff that rolled over from fixed rates, but there are still hundreds of thousands more that will do that, and things will keep getting tighter. You mentioned petrol prices. I mean, they're well over $2, in some places $2.20. That impacts. It's a scoreboard that very few can control, but that will always be there. I guess the silver lining, if there is one for the Prime Minister, and particularly for Jim Chalmers, is that they've got through that budget, they've banked a lot of the money, we're back in surplus, albeit one that I suspect might last one more budget cycle, maybe two, before those underwhelming or overwhelming angers on the economy start really kicking in. And stage 3 tax cuts are coming. So there is some relief on the horizon. That's not until July next year, though. So in the meantime, everyone's got to get through a Christmas. We've got to get through a summer of heating and cooling and surviving what looks like being a hot summer. So that is the main issue. That's going to be the biggest one. And it really is the one that I think will define this first term of the Albanese government. And certainly the Liberal Party will try and make it a referendum on that cost of living issue at the next election, whenever that is held. I think back to Ronald Reagan's line about, is it easier to go to the store and buy things than it was 4 years ago? That was an effective argument in 1980 or 1979. It will be an effective argument in 2024 or 2025 as well.
Okay, the Middle East, I just want to talk a little bit about that. The government, federal government, and Anthony Albanese particularly has kind of strode the world stage incredibly well, surprisingly well for many people. Middle East is a total different kettle of fish. At the moment, there's sort of the politicization of it, comments by Dutton and then response by Albanese. Do you think the parties will come together on this? Because I personally think it's beyond politics. It's a crisis. It's a human crisis. And where do you think how do they handle it?
Well, the politicisation at this time is really bad politics. It's grubby, it's unnecessary, and it causes harm and causes stress for those Australians in particular, and obviously people of Jewish faith, but those that have loved ones still in Israel, loved ones or people they know that may have been caught up in this or maybe still being held hostage, or those at hotspots around the world where this could go on. There is a time to take the temperature out of this, particularly domestically. Australia can present a united front that shows we can support all those that are struggling at the moment and are going through such a time of fear and of concern and anger. Rightfully so. When Hamas was declared a terror organisation by the Morrison government in March last year, Labor has kept that definition and categorisation. And the fact that, the protests and those horrible scenes we saw at the Opera House have managed to divide the country so easily, and the politic and those in the political class so easily is probably concerning. More than anything else. Cheap politicking at a time like this is horrific. The leaders of America and of Europe have managed to unite in their approach to this. Australia should be in lockstep as well, because all the while there's going to be concerned families in Australia and in our allies, and there's going to be more innocent civilians that are killed as this all plays out. So I hope that after what's pretty cheap point scoring early on, the temperature here can be taken out and a clear and consistent and resolute response can be given from Australia and the rest of the world.
Charles, thank you for talking to Fear and Greed.
Anytime.
That was Charles Croucher, Chief Political Editor for Nine News. This is the Fear and Greed Daily Interview. We're not taking a position on yes or no, but we do want everyone to vote, and we want them to vote in an informed manner. That's what we ask. Join us every morning for the full episode of Fear and Greed, Australia's most popular business podcast. I'm Sean Aylmer. Enjoy your day.